Hi everybody, I'm Pia with Stitches and Scraps, and today I want to show you how I do a tubular bind off when I'm working in the round. So a tubular bind off is good for ribbing, particularly knit purl ribbing where it's just one knit and then one purl. What it does is it makes it look like the knitting is just continuous all the way around. And it's a perfect match to the tubular cast on if you know how to do that one. So when I work this in the round, I do it a little differently than a lot of tutorials that I've seen. There's normally a little setup that you do with the first two stitches, and then you drop those two stitches. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to start as though I'm normally doing the tubular bind off, but I'm going to move those two stitches onto the last needle so that they become the last two stitches and I can finish the stitches there. That didn't make a whole lot of sense if you don't know this bind off. So let me show you the basics of the bind off to begin with. So here's my sample, and I have cut the tail to about maybe 4 times, 5 times, something like that, the length of the circle, the circumference of the circle. If you're working with a sweater or something and that's like the hem of a sweater and that's going to be way too long, you need about 3 or 4 times the yarn to do the bind off. But if that's going to be way too long and you don't want to work with that long of a yarn, you can do it in sections. It just means more tails to weave in. So in any case, I'm starting with my tail that I have put on a tapestry needle. So let's start this bind off. The first step, and this is a 4-step bind off, okay? The first step in the bind off is to go into the first knit stitch, and you want to make sure it's a knit stitch. Go into the first knit stitch as though to knit, okay? Pull the yarn through, and now just because this is the first stitch, I'm going to make sure I've snugged it up pretty close to that other needle there. Now normally when you do this in this first step, you're going to take this stitch and just drop it. But in this case, I'm going to take this stitch and I'm going to put it onto this needle because I want to come back to that stitch when I get back around to the last stitch. Now the next step is to go into this stitch here, the second knit stitch, as though to purl. So it's knit, purl. So you go into this one as if to purl. Notice that we're skipping that purl stitch there. We're first working through the knit stitches. Okay, and then we're going to go back and we're going to work into those purl stitches. So now I've done that. All right, I've gone into this as if to purl. The next step, I'm going to go into that purl stitch that we skipped earlier as if to purl as well. So I go into this one as if to purl, and normally I would take this off of the needle and drop it, but again for just these first 2 stitches, I'm going to take it off the needle and put it onto the right hand needle. So now that I've got those first 2 stitches set up, I can get this needle out of the way. You can see my first 2 stitches that I worked are now going to be the last 2 stitches of the round, and that's what I wanted. So let's pull that one through and get it out of the way. If you are doing this on double pointed needles, oh, I'm moving the camera a second, sorry. If you're doing this on double pointed needles, you're going to put those 2 stitches onto the last needle of the round so that they're the last 2 stitches that you work. The key is you should be able to work back into those 2 stitches later. So I've worked a purl. I've gone into this purl stitch at the back as though to purl. Now I want to go into this one as though to knit, but I'm going to do that by coming around from the back. Okay, between these 2 stitches, you see the gap between the 2 stitches? Come around between those 2 stitches and then go into this one as if to knit. So you can see I'm kind of taking my needle up through here, twisting it around and going into this one. Okay, it takes a little bit of practice. If your stitches are very tight, it may be difficult. There is one easier way to do it that makes it a 2-step process. You can bring your needle up between these 2 stitches, pull it all the way through, and then go into this one as if to knit. So if you find that easier, you're welcome to do that. But now you go into this one as if to knit, and that is the end of the 4 steps that are involved in this. Now from this point forward, we're not going to be transferring any more stitches to the other needle. That was just for the first 2 stitches. So now let's look at how to do this once we get going, just the regular 4 steps that you're going to go through. Insert into the knit stitch as if to knit. Now look at this stitch. We had already worked into this before, right? So that's the first part of binding off the stitch. Now we're doing the second part of binding off the stitch. We're going to go into this one as if to knit, okay? And then we're going to drop that from the needle. Just drop it right off. All right, and it'll twist a little bit, and that's perfect. That's what you want. So drop that right off, and then skip the purl stitch and go into this knit stitch as if to purl. Now we go back to our skipped purl stitch and go into that one as if to purl as well, okay, and take it off of the needle. And then we do the fun one, which is going into this purl stitch as if to knit from behind. So come up from behind, wrap your needle around and go into that purl stitch. And again, if it's too tight, you can do this in 2 steps. So in fact, this one is a little tight, so I'm going to do it in 2 steps. I'm going to pull it through, and then I'm going to go back into this one as if to knit. And we're just going to keep doing those 4 steps. And what I like to say to myself as I go through this, and I saw this somewhere in somebody's tutorial, is knit, purl, purl, knit, because it is knit into this knit stitch and then purl into this purl stitch. Oh, look at that, I can do it at the same time. So let me show you that again. Knit into this one and take it off the needle, and purl into this one. Okay, and I'm saying knit and purl, but what I mean is put the needle in as if to knit and put the needle in as if to purl. It's just longer to say that. Okay, so now I've done knit, purl, and now I do purl, knit. So purl into this one and take it off the needle. And then do that funky thing where you go into this one to knit from behind. So come up from behind and go into this one as if to knit. And that's how you do it in 1 step. Okay, one more time. Knit, get it there, knit, take it off the needle, purl, purl, take it off the needle, and through the back, knit. And I'm going, let me turn this around so you can see. I'm going into that front loop just like a normal knit, but I'm first bringing my needle up from the back. So it's not knitting through the back loop. It's not this, okay? You have to come up from between the 2 stitches and then go into this front loop right here. Okay, and that's, you're knitting, but you're bringing the needle up from behind. When you first do it, doing it in 2 steps is probably the easiest. So I'm going to show that one again in a minute. So again, knit, take it off the needle, purl, purl, take it off the needle, and now I'm going to bring it up so that I can do this in 2 stitches. I brought it up in the gap between the 2 stitches, and then I'm going into this one as if to knit. So that's the easier way to do it if you don't want to do the whole twisty thing. Let's see that one more time, because I'm getting to my last 4 stitches here and I want to show you something when I get to the end. So knit, and sorry about the scraping noise, that's the other needle on the table. I don't know how to make that not make that noise. Knit, take it off the needle, and purl. Okay, and then purl. I always want to go into that one like a knit, but it's not, and that's why I say it to myself every time. Knit, purl, purl, come up through between the stitches, and knit. So now I've come to the point where I have only 2 stitches left on this needle. So I need to get more stitches so I can finish working the bind off. So I'm going to take the rest of my stitches here and just scoot them up. Get rid of my little magic loop business going on over here, and scoot all the needles up, or all the stitches up onto one needle. So half of it's bound off, and now I'm working on the other half. again, we're just doing the exact same thing we were doing before, and I'm going to go through it faster now so that you can see it all the way to the end, because at the end is where we're going to do something fun. So knit, take it off the needle, purl. Purl, take it off the needle, come up from behind, and knit. Knit, take it off the needle, skip one, purl. And make sure when you pull it through that it pulls all the way through and doesn't get snagged on anything. You don't want to pull tightly, but you want to pull snugly. It should look like about the same tension as the rest of the stitches. So purl, take it off the needle, and knit. Now I've come to the end and I have only the 4 stitches left on the needle. If you look at these 2 stitches, you'll see there's this little line here. This was when we first worked into them. So remember that each stitch kind of gets worked into twice. And so we've already worked into these 2 once, and when we finish this, we're going to end up having worked into them twice, and then we'll be all done. So knit, purl, and now see how that's connected this across from the last knit stitch to the first knit stitch? Okay, and then purl and knit into this one. And that connects the last purl stitch to the first purl stitch. Now these stitches have already had the first part of the stitch done, so we can just take these, oh, I know it's scary, we can just take these right off of the needle and give it a little tug. Okay, snug it up. My tension was a little bit loose in that first stitch, but you get the idea. We have it completed here. Okay, so that is how you do a tubular bind off that wraps around the first and last stitch here. When you look at the edge, you get this nice neat bound off edge that just looks like the stitching continues around. There's no real bind off, it's just the stitch just keeps going and going and going. It's also very stretchy. This is cotton yarn, which isn't very stretchy to begin with, but the bind off is equally as stretchy as the ribbing. So it's a great bind off for the top of socks, for the bottom of hats, for cuffs, things like that. So thanks for watching. Be sure to check in next time for more great videos.